I want you to do something for me right now. Go look at the silver spot price on your phone. Just pull it up. I'll wait. You see that number? That move you've been watching over the last 2 weeks? That is not random. That is not retail speculation. That is not a Reddit squeeze. That is the market beginning to price in something that the silver stacking community has been saying for years, and that the mainstream financial press is only now starting to understand. 14 days into the Iran war, no missile, no drone, no airstrike has done what a single sentence just did to the foundation of the global financial system. A senior Iranian official told CNN 7 words that should send every American who holds paper assets straight to their phone to recheck their stack. 7 words. Oil through Hormuz. Payment in Chinese yuan. That's it. That's the shot. Not a bullet, not a bomb, a currency. And if you just heard that and thought, okay, what does that have to do with me and my silver? I need you to stay right here. Because by the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly why stackers have had the right instinct all along, what this moment means for the dollar's future, and what the data says about where silver goes from here. This is not hype. This is not a pump. This is history unfolding in real time, and you are positioned for it. I'm your host. This is the Stack Guy. Let's follow the money. Every major news network right now is covering this conflict like a military story. Maps, explosion graphics, interceptor counts, casualty numbers. They're asking, can Israel sustain its air campaign? Can the US Navy keep shipping lanes open? Will Iran escalate further? Those are real questions. But they are the wrong questions if you want to understand what this actually means for your money. The right question is this. What happens to the US dollar if the world's most important oil waterway starts processing transactions in Chinese yuan instead of dollars? And the answer to that question is the reason silver has been money for 5,000 years. The answer to that question is the reason stackers exist. The answer to that question is the reason you're watching this channel right now. To understand it fully, we need to go back. Not 2 weeks, not even 2 years. We need to go back to the moment the dollar stopped being backed by gold, and what America did to replace that backing. Because that replacement is what is now under direct attack. And the attack is not coming from a missile, it is coming from a currency. Here is the history they did not teach you in school, but every serious stacker already understands intuitively. From 1944 to 1971, the dollar operated under the Bretton Woods system. Every US dollar in existence was convertible to gold at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce. Foreign governments trusted the dollar because they could exchange it for something real, something tangible, something the government could not simply print more of. Then, on August 15, 1971, Nixon ended it. Closed the gold window, no warning, no vote. The dollar was now backed by nothing but confidence in the full faith of the United States government. Stackers know what that moment means better than almost anyone. That was the moment the dollar became pure fiat. That was the moment the inflation clock started ticking. Silver was 1.29 an ounce in 1971. By 1980, it hit 50. The first major chapter of fiat currency debasement played out exactly as Austrian economics predicted. But Nixon and Kissinger were not done. They needed a new anchor for the dollar, and they found one. In 1974, Kissinger flew to Saudi Arabia and struck a secret deal. Saudi Arabia would price all of its oil sales in US dollars and only US dollars. America would provide military protection and hardware. OPEC followed. Every oil-producing nation on Earth aligned. And the petrodollar was born. Think about what this created. Every country that needs oil, which is every country on Earth, now needs US dollars to buy it. Japan needs dollars, Germany needs dollars, China needs dollars, India needs dollars. Every industrial economy on the planet has to hold dollar reserves just to keep their factories running and their lights on. This created permanent artificial demand for the dollar that had nothing to do with America's economic productivity. The US could run trillion-dollar deficits. It could print money endlessly. It could finance wars that would bankrupt any other nation. And the dollar stayed strong because the entire world needed it just to buy energy. This is the petrodollar. And for 52 years, it has been the reason the government could get away with what it has done to purchasing power. It is the invisible tax on every American who holds cash. It is the mechanism that has steadily transferred wealth from savers to the government and the financial system. And now Iran, with China standing behind it, has just proposed to start dismantling it, piece by piece, barrel by barrel, in yuan. I want to be very precise here because this is the part of the story that most financial commentators skip over. And understanding it is essential for understanding why this moment is different from every previous challenge to the petrodollar. Because this has been tried before, multiple times, and the outcomes followed a consistent pattern. Iraq, 2000. Saddam Hussein announces that Iraq will price its oil in euros instead of dollars. 3 years later, America invades. The weapons of mass destruction that justified the invasion were never found. What was found immediately after the invasion was that Iraqi oil sales returned to dollars. The euro experiment ended with the regime. Libya, 2011. Muammar Gaddafi proposes a gold-backed pan-African currency for oil trade, a currency that would have given African nations an alternative to both the dollar and the French franc. NATO intervenes. Gaddafi is killed. The gold-backed currency proposal dies with him, and notably, Gaddafi had been accumulating gold reserves for exactly this purpose. Gold that was subsequently relocated. Venezuela. Nicolas Maduro deepens ties with China and Russia, promotes dollar-free oil trade, launches a crypto-backed currency to circumvent sanctions. In January 2026, the Trump administration took significant action against Maduro's government. 3 countries, 3 leaders, 3 attempts to escape the dollar's grip on oil trade, 3 very similar outcomes. Now, here's the critical question that changes everything. What happens when the country making this move is not isolated? What happens when, behind that country, stands the world's second largest economy, with a standing military of 2 million, a nuclear arsenal, and the financial infrastructure to actually make Yuan-denominated oil trade function at global scale? Saddam had no China. Gaddafi had no China. Maduro had China's sympathy, but not its full commitment. Iran, right now, in an active war, with the Strait of Hormuz under its effective control. Iran has China, fully, actively, with enormous financial self-interest in seeing this succeed. China has spent the last decade building the exact infrastructure needed for this moment. Cross-border payment systems that bypass the dollar-based SWIFT network. UN-denominated oil futures on the Shanghai Exchange. Currency swap agreements with dozens of countries. A shadow network through which China already buys 90% of Iran's oil exports, routed through Malaysia, Singapore, and Vietnam. The Yuan alternative already exists. It already works. Iran is not proposing something theoretical. Iran is proposing to move something from the shadows into the open, at the world's most important choke point, with China's full backing. That combination has never existed before, and the silver market is beginning to notice. Let me give you the numbers, because the numbers tell this story more clearly than anything else. The Strait of Hormuz, in normal operation, carries 20 million barrels of oil per day. That is approximately 20% of all oil consumed on Earth, flowing through a corridor 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. There are alternative pipeline routes through Saudi Arabia and the UAE, but they can handle a combined maximum of about 2.6 million barrels per day. The deficit, what is nowhere to go, is 17.4 million barrels every single day the strait remains under Iran's conditions. Oil is already up 47% in 15 days. Brent crude is above $100 a barrel. Shipping insurance rates have multiplied. Tankers are anchored outside the strait waiting. Iran's Revolutionary Guard Navy has begun issuing what analysts are calling transit certificates, permits that allow oil tankers to pass through. The condition attached is specific. Cargo payment must be settled in Chinese yuan. Some countries are already calculating. India, Turkey, and several Southeast Asian economies are quietly evaluating whether yuan settlement is an acceptable price for keeping their energy supplies flowing. They will not announce this publicly, but the conversations are happening. And here's the thing that Wall Street analysts are being very careful not to say too loudly. If even a fraction of Hormuz oil traffic shifts to yuan settlement, and if that becomes a precedent, a new normal, the structural demand for dollars in global energy markets begins to erode, slowly at first, then faster. Then it becomes the new baseline. This is what monetary transitions look like. Not a sudden crash, a slow, grinding erosion of the system's foundations, followed, eventually, by a revaluation event that feels sudden to everyone who was not paying attention. Stackers pay attention. That's why you're here. Now let's talk about what this actually means for physical silver. And I want to do this carefully, because I am not here to hype a price move. I'm here to explain the fundamental logic. The same logic that has made silver a store of value through every monetary transition in human history. Let's start with the relationship between the dollar and precious metals. When the dollar is strong, and when global demand for dollars is structurally high because the entire world needs them to buy oil, the price of silver in dollar terms is suppressed. This is not a conspiracy. This is basic monetary mechanics. If everyone needs dollars, dollars are valuable. If dollars are valuable, you need more silver to buy $1, which means silver's dollar price stays low. This is precisely what has happened since 1974. The petrodollar artificially inflated dollar demand, which artificially suppressed the true purchasing power of silver in dollar terms. The silver-to-dollar ratio has been held down by the same mechanism that has funded government deficits and military expansion for 52 years. Now, what happens when that mechanism weakens? When global dollar demand structurally declines, when countries start settling oil in yuan, when the petrodollar system loses its grip, even gradually, the artificial suppression on precious metals begins to lift. Not in a straight line, not overnight, but directionally, persistently, over time. Look at the historical data. In 1971, when Nixon closed the gold window, silver moved from roughly $1.29 to $50 by 1980. That was a 38-fold move driven by a single monetary policy change. In 2008, when the Federal Reserve began its first major quantitative easing program, another expansion of fiat currency supply, silver moved from under 9 to 49 by 2011. Every significant expansion of fiat currency supply, every weakening of the dollar's structural backing, has historically been reflected in precious metals. What Iran just proposed is not a blip. It is not a 2-week news cycle. If it gains traction, if Yuan-settled oil trade becomes even a partial norm, it represents the first genuine structural threat to the petrodollar since 1974. That is a 52-year-old mechanism beginning to crack. And here is what is specific to silver versus gold that American stackers need to understand right now. Silver is the poor man's gold, and I mean that as a compliment. In a monetary transition, gold moves first and moves biggest in percentage terms for institutional money. But silver, historically, outperforms gold in the back half of monetary crises. The gold to silver ratio, currently sitting near historic highs, has always reverted during precious metals bull runs. When it reverts, silver holders see leveraged gains relative to gold holders. Furthermore, silver has something gold does not: industrial demand that is accelerating independently of monetary dynamics. Solar panels, EV batteries, 5G infrastructure, medical equipment. Silver demand from industry is growing at a rate that even a flat monetary environment would support higher prices. Layer the monetary case on top of the industrial case, and the fundamental picture for silver is about as strong as it has ever been. For American stackers specifically, there is one more dimension that is often overlooked. The United States is a net importer of silver. American industrial silver demand exceeds domestic production. That means any dollar weakness, any decline in the dollar's purchasing power, makes imported silver more expensive in dollar terms, which supports the dollar price of the physical metal you already hold in your hand. You stacked. You held. You took the ridicule from people who called it barbarous and outdated. History is doing what history does. Let me talk directly to the American viewer now, because the implications of a weakening petrodollar hit Americans differently than they hit anyone else on Earth. For most of the world, petrodollar weakness is an abstraction. It affects their foreign reserves, their import costs, their government's debt management. For Americans, it is personal in a way that cuts deeper. The petrodollar has been, in effect, a massive hidden subsidy for the American lifestyle. The ability to run trillion-dollar deficits without triggering hyperinflation. The ability to borrow at low interest rates because the whole world holds dollar assets. The ability to fund a military presence across 800 bases in 70 countries without crushing the domestic economy. All of it flows from the dollar's reserve status, which flows from the petrodollar agreement, which is now under the first genuinely credible challenge in 52 years. What happens to Americans if that subsidy shrinks? Interest rates. If global demand for U.S. Treasury bonds declines, because countries holding fewer dollars have less reason to park those dollars in treasuries, the U.S. government has to offer higher yields to attract buyers. Higher yields mean higher borrowing costs for the government, which means either higher taxes or more money printing. Both of those outcomes are bad for paper savings and good for hard assets. Inflation. The petrodollar has allowed the Federal Reserve to expand the money supply far beyond what a normal country could sustain without triggering severe inflation. The inflation we've seen since 2021, the worst in 40 years, is a preview, a taste, of what happens when dollar creation outpaces dollar demand. If that demand structurally declines further, the inflation picture gets significantly worse before it gets better. Import costs. Americans consume an enormous quantity of imported goods: electronics, clothing, vehicles, food. Those imports are priced in dollars, and as long as the dollar is strong, Americans get a great deal on them. Dollar weakness, driven by declining reserve demand, means every imported item gets more expensive. That hits household budgets immediately and visibly. Now here is the strategic question for American stackers. What do you actually do with this information? First, do not panic. Monetary transitions are measured in years and decades, not days. The dollar will not collapse next week. Treasuries will not become worthless next month. What you are witnessing is a directional shift, the beginning of a long process. Your job is not to time it perfectly. Your job is to be positioned correctly for the direction of travel. Second, think about your stack not just as a hedge against inflation, but as insurance against reserve currency transition. There is a difference. Inflation hedge means silver goes up as prices go up. Reserve currency insurance means silver goes up as the structural demand for dollars goes down, which is a bigger, slower, more fundamental move. Know which scenario you are preparing for. Ideally, you are prepared for both. Third, the dollar cost averaging case for silver has never been stronger. If you are already stacking, this is a moment to recommit to your plan, not to chase a spike. If you are new to stacking, this is not the moment to buy everything at once. It is the moment to start a consistent acquisition strategy that removes the timing question entirely. Fourth, understand the paper versus physical distinction more clearly than ever. Paper silver, ETFs, futures contracts, certificates, is ultimately a dollar-denominated promise. Physical silver in your hand is not. In a scenario where the dollar's structural backing weakens, the distinction between a promise denominated in that currency and a hard asset that exists independently of it becomes very significant. The Stack Guy has always been about physical. This is why. Fifth, pay attention to the gold to silver ratio. As of today, it sits at levels that historically have preceded silver outperforming gold significantly. When this ratio reverts, and historically it always has, silver holders see the kind of gains that make the years of holding through ridicule feel very worthwhile. 52 years ago, two governments made a deal in a desert. One needed security. One needed the world to keep using its currency after it cut the tie to gold. They found each other, and what they built, the Petrodollar, became the most powerful and least understood financial mechanism of the modern world. It funded American military dominance across 70 countries. It allowed deficit spending that would have bankrupted any other nation. It gave Washington a financial weapon, the ability to cut any country off from the global economy simply by threatening swift access and dollar clearing. That weapon was used against Iran for 4 decades of sanctions, against Russia after 2022, against Venezuela, against North Korea. And the consistent result of weaponizing the dollar was that every country on the wrong end of it spent years figuring out how to operate without it. Iran figured it out. And now, at the world's most important oil choke point, with China's full backing, Iran is offering the rest of the world a transaction in Yuan that works when the dollar option is closed. The silver stacking community understood the endgame before most financial commentators were willing to discuss it. Not because stackers are conspiracy theorists, because stackers took seriously what fiat currency history actually shows. Every fiat currency in history has experienced significant devaluation over time. Every monetary system built on political promises rather than hard assets has eventually required repricing. Every artificial suppression of precious metals has eventually resolved. 1971 was one inflection point. What is happening in the Strait of Hormuz right now may be another. I'm not telling you the dollar is dying tomorrow. I'm telling you the direction of travel has become clearer. And the people who are already positioned for that direction of travel, who already hold physical silver, who already understand monetary history, who already made the decision to own real assets rather than paper promises, those people are not scrambling right now. They are watching. And they are ready. That is what it means to stack with conviction, not to get rich quick. To preserve purchasing power through whatever the monetary system throws at you. To hold something real when everything else is just a promise. 52 years ago, a deal built the system. Right now, in 33 kilometers of Persian Gulf water, that system is being tested harder than it ever has been. Your stack exists for exactly this moment. If this video connected the geopolitical dots to what your stack actually means, if it gave you the framework to explain to someone why you hold physical silver and not just more ETFs and index funds, then that is exactly what the Stack Guy is built to do. Every week we take the biggest stories in monetary policy, geopolitics, and precious metals and translate them into strategy for American stackers. Not hype, not price predictions, strategy grounded in monetary history. Hit subscribe, hit the bell. Because the next development in this story, whether it is India's decision on Yuan oil settlement, the Federal Reserve's response to rising treasury yields, or the next major move in the gold to silver ratio, we will cover it before the mainstream financial press figures out why it matters. And I want to hear from you in the comments. One question: what is your current gold to silver ratio in your stack? And has this situation changed how you're thinking about your allocation? Drop it below. This community gives some of the most informed answers on YouTube, and I read everyone. Stack smart, stack physical. Stay informed. I'll see you in the next one.